No.
Great. Good evening, everybody. I'm George Capellas, Professor of Architecture and Chair of the Ryerson University Department of Architectural Science Lectures Committee, and I'll be your host for this evening's lecture. On behalf of our department chair, Mark Gorgolewski, and our dean, Tom Duver, I'd like to welcome you to Ryerson University and the second in our lecture series for 2020-2021. This lecture is part of the Pan-Canadian Lecture Series, and Ryerson is one of 12 Canadian schools of architecture participating in the Canadian Council of University Schools of Architecture Pan-Canada Lecture Series. The series is entitled Global Perspectives and consists of 12 lectures at schools of architecture across Canada. All the lectures are open to the public and accessible online. They tackle a common theme, diversity, as it relates to the architecture profession. This evening's lecture is the sixth and final lecture in the fall roster of sponsored events. For those joining us from our associate university schools of architecture across Canada, I welcome you to Ryerson University. Established in 1948, our history is rooted in Canada's post-war drive to foster career-driven education to meet contemporary societal needs. Ryerson began as a post-secondary institute designed to combine technical education with academic theory, and we've grown to be a major educational institution in the heart of Toronto. The Department of Architectural Science is home to an undergraduate program in architectural science and graduate programs in architecture and building science. During this period of the COVID pandemic, we are operating virtually, and this evening's lecture is one of the many activities we are holding to support students, student learning, and outreach into the profession and lay communities. Ryerson sits on lands in what is now known as Toronto. These lands were inhabited for millennia by many Indigenous nations and peoples. Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. The dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers, such as myself, have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. In this spirit, and on behalf of our university, I welcome you to Ryerson and to our department this evening. Today's lecture will be given by the distinguished Indian architect Anupama Kundoo, now resident in Berlin, and she will be introduced shortly. This event is sponsored by Ryerson University in conjunction with the Canadian Council of University Schools of Architecture, the CCUSA. The chair of the CCUSA is a colleague and friend, Anne Bordelot, the O'Donovan Director and Professor of the University of Waterloo School of Architecture. I'd like to invite Dr. Bordelot to say a few words.
Thank you, George. Thank you for this invitation and for the introduction. Good evening, everyone joining us from across Canada tonight, I hope. So I'm personally zooming in from the School of Architecture at the University of Waterloo, which is located on the traditional land of the neutral Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe people. So the School of Architecture is situated on the Haldimand Track, which is land promised to 6 nations that extends 6 miles on either side of the Grand River. So I'm actually here at the school tonight, but in fact, just as Ryerson, Waterloo Architecture is currently conducting most of its activities, actually all activities pretty much remotely. And this is also the case for most schools across Canada right now. I'm sure we all agree that there are, challenges, and there are many things that we miss, not least the lack of contacts from classroom settings and studio teaching. I certainly miss the in-person education. I never really thought of thinking about in-person education as a thing, but it has become something that's, I guess, opposed to remote learning. But the possibility to launch a lecture series that gathers students, faculty, and professionals across the country is one of those great opportunities made possible by this forced online shift. So I hope this will be something that we can somehow maintain moving forward, because I see tremendous benefits for the discipline and architectural community arising from these amplified connections between schools of architecture across Canada and beyond. So it's really heartening and encouraging to be able to come together not only with this common lecture series, but also through other conversations that I know have been held across schools by student groups, as well as through faculty and staff collaboration. So I should say that while the idea of a Pan-Canada lecture series came from the director at one of our CCUSA meetings, this series could not have happened had it not been for a dedicated group of faculty, staff, and students, again, representative from all the schools across Canada, that really worked to coordinate the effort, invested time, energy to send out invitations, but also disseminate all this information. So I'm really grateful to all of those who were involved in this effort. I think it's really incredibly meaningful to have this joint series focusing on diversity as it relates to our education, our discipline, our profession, particularly in times when important changes seem both urgent, but also truly mobilizing. And I think in that way, somewhat more, in a way, appearing more achievable. So to have this idea come to fruition is really meaningful. And I really want to thank everyone again for making this possible. So all of those who have been involved in making this possible. You know, sometimes scheduling within one school is a headache. So imagining scheduling, you know, times 12. So it's an amazing feat. So with that, I should also say it's truly an honor to be here when such an engaged architect will be sharing our thoughts on what lies at the core of architecture. So the people that build and the people that buildings are for. And with an amazing title here, Taking Time. I met Anupama Kundoo on a cold October weekend in Quebec City a few years ago. And I was truly inspired by the lecture that you gave then. And in fact, I keep referencing it when I do some convocation, you know, celebrations as part, like as a really inspiring practice or a way of approaching architecture and that practice. So I really look forward to hearing more tonight. Thank you, Anupama, for accepting the invitation. And thank you, George and Ryerson community for this opportunity for myself to say a few words on behalf of CCUSA.
Alors, mille merci, Anne, et on vous remercie profondément. It's great to have you here, and we appreciate your leadership so much. Before we introduce our speaker, I would like to briefly describe this evening's program. This lecture is being delivered live from Berlin through a Zoom webinar system. Our speaker has agreed to address any questions or comments from the audience at the end of her talk. Therefore, you, the audience, are invited to post questions and comments through the question and answer post on your screen that you may have, and this is through the webinar link. Our panelists, faculty member Carlo Parente and third-year architectural science student Sadberk Agma will receive and monitor questions. At the conclusion of Ms. Kundoo's talk, I'll turn the podium over to Professor Parente for the discussion. And at the close of the discussion, Sadberk Agma will say a few words of appreciation to our speaker on behalf of the students and faculty. I will then conclude the session and invite you all to our next lecture in February. Now to our lecture and our guest, Anupama Kundoo. At Ryerson, our lecture committee includes students from across our program. As we were developing plans for this year's lecture, students expressed a clear desire to invite architects from a variety of backgrounds, particularly those from historically overlooked groups. Marwa Al-Sakar, a fourth-year student, put forward Anupama Kundoo's name as one such individual. I'd now like to invite Marwa to say a few words of introduction about this evening's speaker. Over to you, Marwa.
Thank you, George. On behalf of the students, faculty, and staff at Ryerson's Department of Architectural Science, it is my pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker. Anupama Kundoo is an internationally recognized and award-winning Indian architect. Her practice focuses on material research and experimentation towards an architecture that has low environmental impact and is appropriate to the socioeconomic context. Kundoo's work also extends to urban design and planning projects with a background in rapid urbanization-related development issues, about which he has written extensively. Born in Pune, India in 1967, she graduated from Sir J.J. College of Architecture, University of Mumbai in 1989, and received her PhD in TU Berlin in 2008. Anupama Kundoo has built extensively in India and has had the experience of working, researching, and teaching in a variety of cultural contexts around the world, in Europe, in the USA, and in Australia. She is currently professor at UCJC Madrid, which she is chair of Affordable Habitat. She is also the Strauch visiting critic at Cornell University. In 2013, Kundoo received an honorable mention in the ArcVision International Prize for Women in Architecture for her dedication when approaching the problem of affordability of construction and of sustainability in all aspects. Anupama Kundoo's lecture is entitled Taking Time. She will be talking about time as the most essential human resource in the context of the built environment. And given the current global context, this topic is most appropriate as it provides food for thought, prompting to a reevaluation of attitudes towards time and efficiency within the profession and each person's individual life. It is an honor to welcome you, Anupama Kundoo, to our DAS community at Ryerson as an architect and woman of color who continues to inspire me and many others in our personal and professional journey in architecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Marwa. Over to you, Anupama.
Well, thank you, George, for having me here. Thank you, George, Anna, and Marwa, for all your kind words. I'm glad that despite all these trying times, we have enough tools to still connect and go ahead with what we had planned. So even though I'm in a different time zone, I'm really happy to connect with you and look forward to the interaction after this. I would like to, first of all, just a minor correction regarding Marwa, your introduction. It's got my CV's a bit updated. Since 2 years, I'm based in Berlin and I'm a professor at Fachhochschule Potsdam. And I haven't, I mean, it was a while ago that the Cornell position, but I had taught at Yale University last semester. So this is just to update for those who've been involved with me or to sort of mention the institutions that I'm now engaged with. I've chosen this topic, taking time, because to summarize all the work I've done over the last 3 decades, and particularly because I have recently opened my exhibition at the Louisiana Museum of Modern Art. It opened with the same title, Taking Time. It's started on the 8th of October and it's going to go on till the end of February. So I thought I would try to walk you through some of the issues and through the lens of time, because even though now these issues that I'm going to talk about are perhaps more relevant now that the world has experienced COVID and we all got rattled a bit from our day-to-day habits. Actually, I have been reflecting on these kind of issues since quite pretty much the beginning of my practice. And this lecture that I have put together also linked with the way I've explained all my work, my research, my practice, and my teaching approaches as a holistic approach at Louisiana has been in preparation for the last 4 years. So I'm going to just walk you through the larger preoccupations that led to the kind of practice I have. And, rather than show you each and every project. So I'm going to just walk you through how the journey unfolded and the kind of things that I investigated and that I still continue to investigate, or that I took the time for. So I have been always wondering that while architecture is often gives a lot of importance to space, it is also equally important to examine architecture from the perspective of time. And first and foremost, because all our visions are about the future, but that we are always dealing with what legacies we have from the past, and our little actions every day in the present that determine the kind of future we are going to have. So I think everything about the profession does involve time, but also architecture takes a lot of time to create, or it used to take a lot of time to create in former times. I think I would like to urge us to zoom out a little bit, not only in space and see the whole overall situation from afar, but also zoom out in terms of time and just look at how we used to, how did Homo sapiens deal with their habitat until the industrialization that took place in certain parts of the world, and the impact of that, and the kind of habits that those things generated. So I would like to first of all begin to show you some of the impressions of from my own context in India, what the way I looked at architecture since the beginning, and walk you a little bit through what I was worrying about in India as well, when faced with the current trends related or triggered by rapid urbanization, etc. So, architecture was always seen as something that took lifetimes to create sometimes, or at least cities took, it did not start with the architect. There was already something ongoing. There were spatial requirements met by materials that were on the spot, and the craft and the luxury, that the luxury of refined buildings that was left behind by people who passed on. It all added up. As time passed, more and more things were left behind for the next generation, and these were often very carefully crafted, and it, like I said, it went over people a lifetime. So people continued, even in Europe. I mean, if you see Notre Dame, or you see many cathedrals, and many projects that have been continued over a couple of generations seamlessly, and they have, tradition has also kept evolving skills and knowledge. So the materiality of architecture and the spatial aspect of architecture were informed each other, and the architecture evolved as a result of that. And you can see the way architecture was anchored in a place. However, due to a couple of issues that rapid urbanization is forcing us to address, much of the not yet urban area of the world is facing a rapid like migration from rural to urban, where people who are not yet prepared for that kind of urban life are having to go there because of the kind of economy we have created. And at least in the Indian context, you see how cities are bursting at the seams, and infrastructure is not able to be delivered as at the rate at which people are flocking to these areas. And India has 1/6 of the world's population, and India and China together, we are 1/3 of the world's population, and we've just started urbanizing at that kind of rate. And so if we follow certain globally accepted standards, it's really going to create a lot of pressure, because we have many more mouths to feed. We have 1/6 of the world's population on just 2.4% of the world's land. So we can't distribute. We have many more. We have to have many we not only have to have, but we've already have a way, memory of how to live with less resources in general. But we are creating, not only is the population expanding, but we are creating a per capita consumption, which is, um, for the same Homo sapiens, is progressively increasing, and globalization is further, increasing the standard that we are trying to provide for anything from housing to any other consumption of in every area. There's a lot more consumption of expenditure of resources, of natural resources per person. And so this is kind of a worrying scenario. And it does not surprise me that, um, if we may take globally accepted standards with central air conditioning and all kinds of new practices that are being, large malls and all that kind of thing, if you apply that everywhere, then you get this kind of a landscape where there are these three different skylines of disparate urban forms that are getting overlapped. There is a slow growing middle skyline of what you see in the peripheries of cities, where the bylaws are not yet in place, but the cities are expanding into these peripheries, and there are kind of organically growing, expanding structures, mostly by individuals. And then there are these larger schemes of developer driven corporatized architecture that is of commodified housing that has become the norm everywhere, whether, and these high rise towers are being airdropped in random locations, regardless of whether it is in Frankfurt or Dubai or Singapore or wherever. You see the same kind of all that we had studied about climatic design, orientation, and everything seems to be no longer important, and uh, it's assumed that everything will be solved by technology or by some experts. So there's all this kind of issues that it's creating. But most of all, what was troubling for me is what it creates, what is you see in the foreground. In order to build all those things through these people who've migrated, um, informal settlements are being seen as a separate problem, but it is also triggered by the same type of development that's planned here. So I believe that this type of if this is a formal city that one is trying to create, the commodified version of housing, and this rapid urbanization, then we are bound to be also creating we are bound to create social segregation. And you therefore see everywhere this kind of very disturbing two cities in one, people living in two lives, both need each other. And it's really harsh. And apart from that, we have also another aspect that is worrying, that despite all technological advances in our times, we've seen that the material consumption, the natural resources that we spend on housing or anything I mean, architecture, we know how to what extent it contributes to environmental, social, and economic disruptions that have occurred in our times. The built environment and the way it's being perceived is is problematic. And I think the materiality of architecture, even though architecture for me was about designing space, and as I said, looking at the resource of time rather than looking at time, questioning the notion of time is money, and not looking at money as a resource, but also our time as a resource, and money as the means to organize collective, including larger sort of or let's say a more including socio-economic concerns, and the welfare of all. Even though on one hand, there are other forces that have contributed to these problems, like I mentioned earlier. But there is also this materiality of architecture itself. For me, it's problematic how it is being, the way current building materials and technologies, like relying on reinforced cement concrete for everything, using bricks that are actually load bearing, using them all over the world as just infill walls or veneers. That everything that we know is being put in question, and all the legacy we had, all the knowledge we had to work with all local materials have been unconsciously or consciously replaced by certain high consumption materials that we don't even question anymore. And I think because of the environmental problems that this creates, I think the materiality of architecture has to be radically rethought if we really want to address the problems in our society right now, including the environment. So when I graduated from architecture, with all these kind of preoccupations, I used to often have this thought that there is nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all. I used to say, why are we in such a hurry? We are in such a hurry. We feel there is such a sense of urgency, as if the rapid urbanization, actually we are stressed ourselves, but what we think is that the urbanization is rapid, as if it's some kind of natural phenomenon. And we think that therefore we have to be in a hurry, and we don't have to take time to think and just produce ugly things at a high speed. And I used to wonder why the whole thing is even being done. Because everybody complains, and I realize it's not just my feeling. Everybody is unsatisfied with the kind of built environment we are creating. And we've been 30 years later since I graduated, none of those problems got addressed. It's all those problems exist, and they are much bigger, each of those things I mentioned. So I used to wonder, when are we going to actually take the time to think and do it better? If there is a problem, you need to think a little more, maybe, not less. You can't cut back on thinking. So even in order to provide high speed solutions, we need to spend some of that time on the thinking. So this, of course, is this quote, this formulation is from Peter Drucker, who's the inventor of the bullet journal of time management. And I found it really interesting to if you take some time to reflect, you may start realizing that you don't need to do a lot of things which you were busy with. And I mean, at least that was my experience. So when I dropped out of Bombay, I wanted to buy time, actually, when I was really very young. And that's why I think I have this kind of practice, and I want to take you along that journey. So I was roaming around with a backpack, and I landed up in a place called Auroville. At that time, I felt that I know that everybody's insecure about what they do. And I realized one has to disconnect one's livelihood issues and really take charge of one's own time to be a free person, and to then think, instead of becoming a wage slave and just, giving up your whole day to do something which you may not actually believe in, or you may believe in the opposite. So why should you be doing something? So it led to me building this first round wood house, very simple, with very natural materials. And it doesn't take much time to build such a thing. I didn't even expect it to last so long. And I landed up living here for 10 long years. I was very young, and I thought that this kind of materials of untreated wood, they'll probably last a year or so. And since I was very young, I thought a year was a long time. So I was really felt, oh my God, it could, it's not costly. So I realized that, if you want to be free, sometimes you have to take certain decisions in your life. So I felt it's better to simplify and need less, so that you don't need those jobs which you would do if you didn't like to do them. So, and to really position oneself and face life, straight away. So during those through that first few steps, of applying it to my own personal life, and to discovering, that simplicity, is so liberating. I also realized, yeah, all I want is less, and getting into that mood, spending time in this kind of space, I realized that, yes, it was a best decision to step back and take time. And even now, I try every day to have some time for the uselessness of doing nothing, and to just think, if what else should you cancel from your agenda, and so on. So through this time of living like this, where there was a simple one lamp, one solar panel, a long cable, taking the same lamp here and there, but because, when you're young and you're just trying to meet your, own, the expenses of your own life. So I realized that, I wanted to make that time to have a certain kind of profession. And I decided that even if there are no clients, knocking at your door, you can start working on your own questions, and I think it was quite a blessing, in fact, because it really liberated me, because I started noticing more things. I started um, uh, working on the answers to some of my own questions, and by the time the clients came, I had already some things to offer. So, these were some of the other houses I made, inspired by my own simple life. And I started observing, actually, that the way materials, I started questioning every time I had a question, and I realized that I have to ask one question even before that, because even there is an assumption that I have to put in question. And I realized that the building materials that you procure and everything that we build with, actually all materials, natural or manufactured, come from the earth, but the natural materials, they don't need to undergo any energy expense, or factories, etc., and they can be used directly. But more than that, I started observing that when it is in a human scale, when it's a hand extracted, you look, they are taking granite out of this mountain. The slabs are still being taken out by hand in this rural area. And I started wanting to try to use, I started noticing how material sourcing, it starts from the material sourcing, what kind of impact it does. So and whether, a quarry is, I realize it's not whether you use stone uh, or that is good, or earth is good. It's a question of not just the material or the skill, it's also the scale at which it is being procured, and what the impact is on the local area. And I started trying to use these kind of materials that with and excelling on the skill. And I realized the luxury is not about whether you use a silk, it's not like silk is more luxurious than cotton. It's even cotton, if it's crafted with much more refinement, that's what makes it luxurious. It's not just an expensive or a cheap material. It's how the human has engaged with it that makes it refined. And I started producing elements. There's a lot of engineering in it, because I'm sort of making these self-supported elements on dry, it's also into this dry kind of it's laid in a dry bed of chips of granite. And these are some of the kind of work, contemporary. I started showing people that you can do contemporary work by still being locally rooted, and you can critically examine local materials and local skills, but to be aware of the material beyond a kind of religious black and white judgment that sometimes green rating has become about, but to really look at it as in like to look at it holistically, and consider all these, the way a territory is affected by a choice of material, but a choice of technology too, and the choice of how much of that money that you spend will remain in the local economy or not. And so often there are questions that are placed that if you include local people, or you use like for instance this kind of stone, if you build these houses with a random pieces of stone rather than well cut ones, that it's going to be impossible to do in today's time. But actually that's the material they have, that's what you have right on the spot, and it's often considered to be economically cheaper to take something from very far away. But if you, and these are all myths, I realize, if you actually go down to the details, you find out that actually it cannot be more expensive, it has to be less expensive. And in fact, if you, in the industrial times, people have tried to save money spent on humans and rather spend more on materials and spend less on the labor. And I feel we have that is exactly the mistake. I think if one spends less on materials and more on people, then that's how you have a empowerment of people, and you distribute the money, and that's how people, craftsmen, get to have a good life rather than all the skills and knowledge dying out. So I discovered the same kind of thing just because I had taken the time to, when I lived in this rural area, I thought there's nothing here. I didn't know what to build a first house with. I thought, oh, they have nothing. But now I'm going to show you one after the other that all of these things have come out of the same spot, whether it is made out of round wood, which means instead of cutting a piece of timber into a rectangular section, you're taking a whole tree, and therefore it means that you can take a younger tree, you can take thinnings out of a reforested place and use it rather than waiting for it to be many more 25 or 30 years old and then just because you wanted rectangle. So similarly, I noticed the more you see, the more you take the time and the more you engage, you start seeing there is more and more stuff around you. You just didn't notice. So I started noticing I've noticed the stone, I noticed the bricks, and I noticed that what we used to call local bricks, very weak bricks, we preferred the wire cut industrial bricks because that's how we were taught. And then I started realizing, when I started noticing all these invisible activities that happen in the countryside. So people who grow rice otherwise are making bricks in some part of the year, and they make see this is the same Casuarina equisetiflorea, the same thinnings they're using for baking the bricks, which they've sourced themselves from plantations they did themselves. And those are the same plants, when they grow a bit thicker, is what my house was made of, and it was made of what people use for scaffolding actually. So all of these are, I started to notice so much more because I just stopped looking up far away, but looking more and more in, zooming into the place and noticing more. So I started noticing these incredible interrelationships that people's activities have. It's not like a building industry. Before things got industrialized, it was not as if there are brick makers doing only brick. They are rice growers also. They are also people who are doing plantations. They've got peanuts growing there. They've got coconut plantations. They've got all this growing. So it's part of a whole cycle. And according to the season, people are doing that activity. So if you stop buying those kind of local bricks, or this kind of local lime that this community's whole day busy with, then what happens is you come out from an architecture school and you prescribe Portland cement and whatever it is you're taught, and then you don't notice what's around you. So what happens is that obviously, like for example, these kilns are already stopped over the last decade. So what happens is the rate at which these things are disappearing because no one's buying those things, it's also going to affect the rice the price of the rice, because they were not only doing that, this is what I mean. There were many things that came to my mind. So even though I'm not an economist, and I'm not like, I didn't study social issues, but just by observing, you realize, oh my God, there's a whole intricate interrelationship, like a Jenga tower that will collapse if you take out a wrong piece. And I started just dealing with more respect or awareness. So one of the first things I noticed was that there were also similarly, so I kept noticing more and more, and then I said, oh my God, there are so many skills. This looked like nothing, it's a pottery shed. And you realize that, because you used to see people trying to sell pots at the roadside, and no one's buying those pots anymore for cooking. So they, you just realize that there are people's livelihoods which are threatened. Then if you just go and enter, see more what they're doing, I realize that if you produce ceramic, if you produce roofing elements or something with their skills, then urbanization could guarantee their livelihood rather than move over. And I get to have a building material that will have some superior qualities, and I don't have to import things from far away. So anyway, cement and steel are in short supply in rural India for the same reasons, that because they are energy consuming, etc. So I started doing certain kind of early experiments from the very first project I did. In fact, when I just came out of school, it was like a year. I mean, I had built myself a hut, and then I did a house with this kind of roofing. And you see that this is being also fired not in a factory, it's in among their plantations. They are doing the same thing. They've got their coconut shells from their own trees. And all I'm bringing in is, so I think thoughts about how you can negotiate between high tech and low tech. In fact, I don't like this division of words either, because often the low tech buildings are in fact requiring much more knowledge. People, it's much more complex to calculate all this sort of thing compared to RCC column frame steel structures and so on, because masonry and massive construction requires or if you build with earth, your earth is not going to be a standard like a Portland cement. You're going to have to know its properties. So I realize one of the main reasons we are probably not doing all this is because we just don't know. Maybe we just are lazy and don't want to know. It's better, easier to work with standard solutions. So, but our forefathers knew all that, and I think I felt that we could revisit some of those things. And I relied a lot on engineering knowledge, because I felt that my aim was to be able to build many more square meters with much less material. And I felt that that would be more in the direction of evolution, if knowledge could be used to create something superior, like insulated roofs, and not requiring any structural wood or steel to support it, unlike the other terracotta roofs that our ancestors used. And in fact, we shouldn't throw the baby with the bathwater. Just because we don't have the wood anymore to support the terracotta, why should we stop using terracotta? Nowadays, people build reinforced concrete roofs and stick the terracotta for show when it's not even necessary. And even that's a factory made one. So these are, then as I went along and got to know these people and are more skilled. So this is the actual pot that they used to try to sell. This is their local pot. And 10 years later, I got another idea of how to use these as filler slabs, to use as lost shuttering, in order to save 2 steel bars out of 3, to optimize. So these are kind of engineering constructs where, the imperfections of handmade products were embedded work as a kind of show thing of, out of nostalgia, but you're actually using it as a principal structural tectonic contribution to architecture. So these are the type of things I built. And I'm just sort of explaining, because it took me 10 long years to know all those things, which I applied later to the wall house. So it was bits and bits of bit by bit. Okay, it takes a lot of time to come out with all of that. But I believe that just because it looks intimidating, if you it doesn't mean you shouldn't start, because if you did start, like the hare and the tortoise, if you started and you keep steady on the same, not changing your goal every 2 minutes with a new fad, you're going to arrive earlier. And 30 years later, I didn't expect, to be here, because I was in the middle of nowhere doing little things one after the other. But I was learning. The point is, I was learning. And even if little experiments didn't work out, my next project was receiving a more capable architect or a person with more experience or knowledge. So I was just chasing that knowledge, I guess. And so look, this is the house I later built for myself, because mainly because I 10 years later, I felt like, okay, I couldn't, I was not ready to build anything that would be less climatically comfortable than my hut. I realized after living in that affordable way that when I visited other people's homes, I found they were hotter than my own. So I got into roof investigations to be able to have, I mean, just because I'm going to build a permanent house, I shouldn't have something that is working less for the climatically. So those kind of challenges made me produce a whole lot of, different material researches, and led to where I am today, with all this kind of palette of all of this coming out of the same local area where I found nothing when I first went. I used to think there's nothing here. I thought that, because this literally looked like a barren area. So, and then you see that, there are materials, there are skills. They don't, you have to just learn to see, and that's what I did. And I think you also need time for when you don't know things when you're young. If you give yourself time, your intelligence can come leak out. If you're in a hurry, you would just not explore that, I think. So anyway, so look, here are some ferrocement screens. So my house became wall house. It became quite known. MoMA had acquired the model and drawings for it recently, and it's probably one of my best known projects, because I could freely experiment since it was my own house. I think I only built the house. It's very empty. The house has nearly nothing. I think I only built all this to experiment all those things at no client's cost, so I could freely try what I wanted. So like I said, for me, space is the only thing that was important, actually. But I got drawn into all this material research because I'm not really obsessed with materials as such, but I just felt that it doesn't matter. You shouldn't have any fetishes over which material you want to build. You shouldn't have favorite materials. You should build with whatever is there, and you should be able to do architecture with anything, and that was the spirit. Like, you see the granite slabs here that I've shown you before, and so on. So, I applied some of these kind of lessons learned also into other projects in the residential area. But also here you see the terracotta. So it's a project we completed last year. It's a daycare in Pondicherry for children of very disadvantaged, backgrounds. So this is the entire walls are porous, so that because it's a very low cost building, and windows were too expensive to bring in those fixtures. So a lot of these buildings that I landed up doing, were pretty there was always budget issues to all of this because of the context and the kind of clients who used to approach me, because they knew that I would try to save whatever can be saved, So I mean, the kind of work I did had brought me to radically experiment with many different things, as I said, and I started getting hooked. I mean, I lost my fear for experimenting, but one of the most radical things I did was this project, building upon the work of Ray Meeker, a ceramist. This is called baked in situ earth construction. So what happens in this is that you build earth houses with plain mud and with mud mortar, and then you use it as a kiln and you stuff it with other bricks and ceramic products like tiles and spouts and whatever it is you want, wash basins, toilet pans. And normally bricks in an oven would lose about 40% of the heat you generate into the oven walls, the kiln walls. And in this case, you tap that heat and you fire your structure. So very sounds easier than it is, believe me. It's quite a crazy thing to be doing. And but yeah, it's astonishing that it actually works. And so this is one of the crazy projects. I loved this. It takes about 3 or 4 days to cook. And this is called Voluntariat Homes for Homeless Children. In the end, it looks like that. It's literally made out of waste materials, and very humble project. But I also, the domes were made because you see the form, it would be possible to make the thinnest thing, and the bricks could be fired through if they are thin. So if the earlier structures we did in this technology had walls on which the dome sat or bolts sat, but in this case I realized the economy would actually happen if the whole thing is a shell. So even with reinforced concrete, I experimented a lot, and I've used to sometimes take, for instance, in this one, so many different structural designs to try to reduce the volume of concrete. So it's not about, saying concrete is bad or not, but I think if you use it consciously for areas where you need that kind of strength and spans. Here, for instance, we used only 75 cubic meters instead of the 125 that a typical building of the span would cost, by leaning the pillars, shortening the span, but also by using ferro cement as a loss shuttering to have this very volume economizing kind of concrete. So, so there were several invisible innovations there in the structure itself. So, while I started working with ferrocement, you see, this is a ferrocement mold in which we are going to cast the concrete so that the shuttering is affordable. Often efficient formwork, efficient concrete structures are not used because the formwork is expensive. So I was working a lot on formwork. So, I did a lot of things with concrete too. This is a library with Braille books, and the town hall complex in Oroville, where we've tried to do very many large span structures, always looking at the volume of concrete that we are going to spend with large ramps, large cantilevers, and intelligent structures. And that brings me to the last material group actually that I have been researching, which is ferrocement, which I mentioned earlier. It's, instead of using steel, you use chicken mesh, and instead of it being about 10 to 12 or 15 centimeters as concrete slabs are, it's only 2.5 centimeters. And if you use, in some instances, only 1.2 centimeters. So this could be a very interesting material for the future because it has also good properties, ductile properties, and we're doing research with natural fibers and other meshes. This was exhibited in Venice at the Biennale. So I'm looking at this a lot now at the moment because I think it's such little use of materials that I'm looking at origami, crease patterns, and because the material is so thin, looking at how it could be cast on carton or recycled paper and stuff like that for refugees or disaster relief, and a lot of kind of housing that we might need to do in the age of climate change. So these are just experiments that I'm exploring. You see how little steel is involved. A structure like this, which is just a prototype for a housing, it took me about just 4 days to build such a thing, So yes, I'm saying taking time. The actual architecture doesn't take time, but it took me many years to do each of these ideas that I'm doing parallel, with a lot of prototyping, etc. And the same ferrocement, I would like to also show you a prefabricated version which we are working with, which I've called Fulfill Homes. It can be assembled also in a day. These are like crates in ferrocement they are stiffened, because a box is a way of stiffening a thin sheet instead of folding and bending the material. And they're all sized for the various things you need to have for storage, including kitchen blocks, and these are different applications. I have had the occasion to get some of the craftsmen over to Berlin and test it in Mike Schleich's lab to see, how it performs, as opposed to concrete, reinforced concrete, which would break. This is going to bend, and to see whether it does not therefore give us a really good material for the future. So, and the plasticity, and because the form gives strength, I think it's a very interesting material for architects. This is a prefabricated toilet construction. And this is another one which is about co-housing, where, looking at people's participation in building communities. It's also an area where I'm talking about taking time, is also tapping into the time of people to contribute, even in urban areas, to their own housing. So, like rammed earth walls, or if you use technologies that anybody can contribute to, if they want to reduce their bank loans, etc. So, this is one project where, right now I'm focusing on housing. So I mean, these are some of those projects. I'm just giving you all a glimpse. And finally, here are some examples of how in the studio I've been using materials like urban waste as a kind of playful tools, for in the architecture studio to question, to see to what extent we can absorb urban waste and build with them. In this case, we are filling them back with cement and or water. And this is a project in Mexico. It's in a public space. Or we've made this kind of sofas out of old books. This is another project where we've recycled books to make canopies out of them, because books are being burnt and pulped at large numbers, and when I'm asked to do provisional, like temporary projects such as pavilions, this is for 4 months in Barcelona, Library of Lost Books, I try to not buy any material. I see what junk I can assemble and just extend their life a little bit. And I vacuum packed it in the technology that they vacuum pack their hams and olives. It's a way to extend the life of books in the same way. So, these are some of the projects that I'm doing in the category of, it takes time to, because these are not ready-made things, but then you land up using more human resources like time, intelligence, muscles, and you save natural resources like, quarrying and whatever else, and pollution. So these are some of my strategies. And I actually use this in mostly these materials to have fun with students, because I like, as a teacher, to give students the opportunity to be even more connected to ground realities by building with real materials in real scale, in real places, with real people. So, it can be short workshops for a week or for a couple of days, but I think it gives it's a very good way to demystify construction and be creative and ingenious with whatever you find around you, whether it's a waste denim that is being cut out and collected in after exporting all the jeans from India and China to the rest of the world. Then we have all the junk lying with us. So we try to address and reduce some waste on one hand, but also give students some material to play with, and for them to address issues and look at a couple of life cycles. Like, for example, when we built the Fulfill homes in Venice, after we showed it in the Biennale, we came back with our students and we worked with a refugee community to add to whatever missing facilities they had, So all of this is, I think, quite empowering for students. And I mean, here, for instance, the students of the AA in a workshop with Roundwood for a week, building a watchtower for the botanical garden. So I think I'm running out of time. I'm just showing you some of these images, and I will end. I think I'm pretty close to finishing, actually. I just want to say that I started with the urban problem in Bombay. And I want to also explain that all these projects I mentioned, Auroville is a place where I started my practice. That's where there is a planned city designed by Roger Anger, French architect. It's an idealistic city for the future, for experimentation. And I had the good fortune of working with him, collaborating over some 17 years. And I have been working on an urban proposal, which is not a tower typology, but it's very much an alternative it's a high density version with a much more horizontal movement, because Auroville is planned in a pedestrian context, with where the car won't dominate, and it's taking care of all the concerns I've told you in the very beginning of the presentation of all the Indian urban problems, and looking at it holistically. So this project is called the Line of Goodwill. It is conceived as, it's a habitat, is a long 800-meter long development, from the city center going all the way to its periphery, with terraces and mobility on various levels. And it mainly is a cluster of co-housing of 80 to 100 people. Here you see we are discussing with Jan Gale about the mobility aspect. And most of this is being done in a collaborative way, with students giving their inputs and designing different kind of habitat pockets, examples, researching with, you see, this is an image from the Louisiana Museum, where we have also illustrated in one-to-one solar, energy generating facades, urban farming, and all of that included into the future facade. So this is an aspect also of my work where planning is also involved, but I won't have the time to get into that now. But I think basically that we need to yes, take time as architects, not only to reflect and consider where we are investing our own personal time, but also to be able to participate in the collective, and to be not to think of it as a solitary practice, but be able to work and be active, taking time for the collective as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anupama. I see that there are questions starting to come, so I'm going to turn this over to my colleagues, Carlo Parente and Sadberg Agma, who will be giving you questions, and hopefully we'll be able to continue this discussion with our participants.
Yeah, thank you so much for the inspiring lecture. There are a few questions that are coming in, and the first question that's come in is actually multiple questions, so I'll try to unpack it a little bit and maybe separate the questions for you. And it picks up on how you ended, really. So on the theme of time, how do you imagine the future of architecture from a climate change perspective in a post-pandemic era?
Well, I obviously, just because you asked the question, it doesn't mean I know the answer. But I can just give my own personal approach towards my own questions of this nature. I feel there are areas that are in our personal control, and there are areas that depend on the rest of the collective. So, but I do believe that there is no climate change and all our predictions. A lot of the crisis, especially about man-made crisis, like you know, like when we have affordability issue crisis or things like that, which are definitely man-made issues, unlike say COVID maybe, or maybe even that is man-made. But when it's a man-made issue, when we have a projection about something, it's not like that is the projection is always made based on what trend we have now, and if we are going to go on like that. If we are going to go on like that, yes, we have a, see, suppose I earn 1,000 euros and I'm spending 2,000, I'm going to have debts. So if I don't change my trend, I have a bad future. So I'm going to worry. But if I know that I'm generating 1,000 and if I spend 500, I'm going to be rich. So I don't get personally worried about anything, because at every minute, and that's what I mean by taking time, every time is now. It depends on today if I'm going to go and spend the 1,000 euros or 500 or 2,000. And every minute I can do it's a small thing I have to do in the moment, because now is so short. But what I do is going to determine my action, and so will others. And then I also don't like to feel like a victim of other people's actions. So I try to not wait for them to act that way. So I think, yes, there are issues at hand, but in every case, what I am more concerned about is that these worries that the young students have, I had them 30 years ago. And nobody did anything for 30 years. They beat blah, 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 lots of conferences. But to be very honest, lots of papers, but no change in habits. So I'm not surprised.
This next.
I'm sorry I didn't answer your question. That's all I can say to that topic.
The same individual asked a question that maybe would have been better for Sandberg to question you on, because it's really about advice to students. But I'll read it since it's part of the same question. Asking this person is asking if you have advice for students or recent graduates who want to gain hands-on experience and maybe learn in a different location or abroad.
Why not in your own spot? You can use your hands everywhere. Like, believe me, you may think that a lot of people ask me this question, look, now I'm in Berlin. So I'm doing hands-on projects with my students in Berlin for this problem here, we don't really, if you don't go anywhere, the world will come to you. It happened in my case. I can just tell you that whatever worries you, it is right around you. So, even if there are global trends, we are all local. Wherever we are there. I can't breathe another air from somewhere. Ultimately, I have to be there, right, where I am. So I think to use your hands has to do also with where you are. Like now I'm in Berlin, and most people tell me, like, I wanted to have a table, one of my tables, I want to round off one edge. And they all tell me, it's going to be so expensive. Just for one slab, you're going to go and cut it. Why don't we use a rectangle? I said, it's not working in my space, I want a longer table. I have to round it off. And then it's just that we think it's not possible. It is. Why is it not possible? If I can use my hands in India, I can use my hands in Berlin. And I think you will not use your hands in the same way, because your situation is challenging, and therefore you will do even a better result when you did it. There'll be something more genius coming out of it. That's what I would say. But if you want to go elsewhere, I do recommend that experience too, because sometimes it's just a stimulating thing to go elsewhere and think of your context. But I do think people should, because, we have a lot of intelligence in our hands. Hands are not just to execute. It has the intelligence. So intuitively, when you learn something with your hand, like suppose I knit or I fold a paper and do origami, like a little 3-year-old will know that if you fold a paper, a square becomes a triangle. They may not know the names. So there is a hand and brain link, which is very important to not stop using that.
Mm-hmm. That's one aspect that I really loved about your lecture, actually, where you spoke about not needing to be a material expert, And there's something about the empirical knowledge you gain from just playing with the material to understand it that affected the way that you move forward and the intuition that you actually got from that and gained from that. And it affects the, my guess is that it affects you moving forward and how you develop those ideas.
Yes, I do agree that every action you do or don't do makes you who you are, you know, tomorrow. Like if I have apathy, or if I am enthusiastic, or if I did something, what do you lose if you do something, it didn't work? You just have ruled out one area of what doesn't work. So even in that you progress, you know.
Yeah, I love that. Sandberg, did you want to ask a question or maybe read one of the questions from our audience?
Sure. So one of the questions we got is how we often, as students, get taught and talked about designing sustainably. So why are more designers not using these methods? And I think it goes back to your 30 years and nothing has changed, but they want to.
Sorry, I think I could try to answer it in a different way. I think that real thing, I mean, I can't be explaining, we should be asking them why they are not doing. See, I am very concerned today. Earlier, when I was younger, I thought that, oh, maybe they don't know how to do it sustainably, or maybe people don't want to live with less, or all kinds of things. Today, I'm really concerned because I know we know everything that we need to know. We have even started, like, look, my career is made of my 5 years in architecture school in Bombay. I learned so much there, you know, I could do all this. Okay. And the rest you keep learning in your life, right? So I realized since almost 10 years that actually we know everything and we're still not doing it. Like everybody knows that this is not good and this is good. Then why are you still doing when you know it's not good? This is a question. This is the key question. People say, oh, we don't like this, but they, as if we are split, everyone's like split personalities, like they like one thing and they do another thing. I just don't get it. I would understand if people openly say, look, I love to be a consumer. They think, no, the other is consuming. I am just part of the movement. I'm just part of the habits of I'm grown up in this society. And I think that this thinking has probably come also from my industrialization theory, you know, which I could be totally wrong. Some anthropologist is going to catch me and, say it's not like that. But I think, you know, we may have over standardized ourselves during industrialization, right? So if you see, like, it just, when you go to buy clothes, you see there, when I come to Europe and I see, you know, there's S, M and L. Okay. So if I'm not going to fit in one of those, like some part is S, some part is M. So I think something is wrong with me. Like, I don't think something is wrong with me because I grew up in a culture where we had to go to the tailor, and never did I think something's wrong with me. If my dress didn't fit, it was the tailor's fault. Okay. It was never my fault. And now suddenly, why should I think? But I see a lot of people really not realizing that the over standardization was oversimplified and the SML is the wrong thing, if at all, but not me. But in every area, we are just accepting everything and feeling impotent when actually we are not impotent. Each of us are intelligent beings, because even if we don't do anything, we are still alive. Our body knows how to run. We know how to breathe. The heart is beating. We are giving no instructions. We are intelligent, you know, but we are not even taking the time to admit what we are good at, you know. We're just rushing about, getting so influenced by other people and needing validation from outside the whole time. So I don't know why we are not doing what we would like to do.
Thank you for that. The same person also has another question, and it's, how do you think we can design suburbs in the future where every house doesn't look the same as the other? And how can we make suburban architecture more exciting with the growing population?
I think we have to really question the suburbs in the first place. I don't know which suburbs you're referring to, but I think, you know, the suburbs that got enabled by the car movement, it makes us get already, you know, what happens is that the car, we stop designing for the convenience of us, of the human, but we start designing for the convenience of the machines that we created. And at some point we become the tools of those tools we have created. And some, like, we become victims, and then we are complaining that we have traffic jams, and but we are actually creating that life, you know. And the suburbs and the relationship suburbs have to the city, it has this problematic thing with the car commute aspect, you know. And I think if the mobility, which is going to in the future be reconfigured, like if you go to places like Copenhagen and you see that cars have made way for bicycles, big time. And if we know this is going to happen, and formerly when people used to go to the suburbs with their children to have a garden and house, and leave the city, now people are coming back because there are better facilities. If it's a pedestrian city and the noise is not there, and you can, as an older person, you can have all your time to go to the museums and all the culture. You have everywhere, handicapped or whatever, barrier free. You have access whether you're young or old to things. So I think that is going to change, I think, the nature of the suburb. And I think when, again, the need to be different, each house being different from each other, it happens again because we are being sold ready-made products. Then we want the difference. But if you don't have that, the first problem in the first place, then you wouldn't mind not being different. Because look at old cities like Venice. No house wants to be different as such. They are all similar, the technologies, they belong. And the differences comes from your own individuality in a very natural way. But now, because everything is standardized and we all want to stick out, and everybody is trying to stick out, even if they're a sore thumb. So we are too much engaged with our identity, or trying to be different, because we are too much conforming to trends. That's my feeling, you know. Sorry, I'm taking everything in a philosophical direction. Maybe it's the time of the day or night.
No, I think that was great. Thank you.
But I'm here also for factual questions, okay? But I'm also happy to just talk about these things, and also the things for which I still don't have answers myself.
Well, maybe I'll throw a couple factual questions at you then. I'll combine two questions. Someone's asking about how you deal with waterproofing of the ferro cement roofs.
Now that is totally bringing me down to the ground. Okay. See, ferro cement, you don't have to worry about waterproofing, because cement is waterproof. And ferro cement was first used for boats, to make boats. Even now, ferro cement was more known to make boats than architecture, before Nervi took it up and started using ferro cement to reduce the weight of concrete. So because concrete has a problem that after a certain span, its own self weight works against you. So ferrocement became interesting because the parts, when you see these undulating things in Nervi's work, you'll see that he has lightened all of that by using ferrocement. So ferrocement will not have any, it's not as if it will be any less waterproof than any other application of cement. And there are different types of cements that that's ferrocement can be made with.
We have another now to take you back in the other direction. How might architecture influence cultural and economic norms to effectively address issues of sustainability, social justice, attitudes towards climate change, and the global challenges and other global challenges?
Oh my God, the whole world has, well, all issues are there. What I can say is, look, all the negative impact you see now of a certain kind of architecture, of what I called the commodified version of housing. We see all the affordability issues, we see, all the environmental issues, we see the social segregation. So we already can see the impact. You see the direct relationship between architecture and those sustainability issues under these three categories of environment, social, and economic impact. So similarly, it could be also benign. if we would be aware of it and do it that way. So I think, I hope that my lecture has shown some ways in which it could happen. But again, it's not as if I'm advocating like the very big corporate offices. I don't think people are going to always ask, how can you have a bigger impact? I don't think one person has to have a bigger impact. Lots of practitioners, like it always used to be, there used to be small studios. It's like a hairdresser, the hairdresser can only do that many heads, in a day. Imagine if we would go to that dog wash thing, if everything would be automatized. And then, of course, they'll be able to do many more haircuts. And maybe we don't like that kind of treatment. So I think, yes, of course, we can see in every area architecture, because we affect all the users. All the users use the part we didn't build, the negative space of the building. And all the people, all the rest are also affected by architecture, because those who build, their livelihoods, who are involved with the making of buildings, it's not just masons and craftsmen, all the material manufacturers, all the people who do infrastructure, people who provide electricity, everyone's involved. And we are directly involved. So architecture will definitely affect everything. And last philosophical comment, what we make, it makes us. So like they say that you make your city and you shape your city and the city shapes you, or, you shape your home and the home shapes you. So but also while we make, what we make, it makes us. So I'm very concerned about that as well.
I think one question that might sort of tie into this might be, someone's asking, how did you go about establishing relationships with skilled craft people? And how do abilities and creativity of these craftspeople inspire you in your own work?
I never saw the difference between me and them, to be honest. And I still don't see. I never felt like I am versus someone, whether it is a contractor or the engineer. I just feel all of us together make those, anything, actually, even for music or for theater, for film, everybody's involved in creating a thing. And so I was never aware of any gaps like that. And I also don't think they were either. And I think, who won't like to have a job, so if you tell them, hey, there's a project, so everything is easy, you just because also when you are experimenting, they are also experimenting. And if you don't create a hierarchy there, then you can benefit from the experience of others, and the things you don't know, someone else in the team knows them. So I think it's always inspiring, because everything what other people do and make is very inspiring. Actually, we learn a lot from people, and yeah, they bring in their experience if we make space for it.
And time.
And time to make space.
There was a question earlier about your practice, actually, and it was in the chat menu about how there's an assumption that you're going to grow your practice, but like they're asking, how do you grow Anupama Kundoo architects internationally? And maybe I'll just add, how does working internationally change your process? Because a lot of it has to do with the knowledge of an existing place. So how do you deal with exploring a new place where you're doing work?
I also do think we are more common than we are different. I really think the Homo sapiens are not so different from each other, there is, apart from this industrialization aspect, I really don't see much difference, because it's not like I went from India, from Bombay to South India. I went from humidity to more humidity. Or if I work in some projects in India, I've worked in cold climates. So wherever you go, the difference that you find that is cultural is just a very normal difference. It's not the human that is different, like if if a German goes to India, like for example, let's say in Germany we have less sun, so we are going to open to the sun, and in India we have too much, so we're going to shut to the sun. But it's not that the Indian has that balcony culture and the German has this balcony culture. You know, if that same German goes to India, he also needs protection from the sun. So and when I come here, I also, you know, so I think when knowledge is always universal, the application is local. Like, it's just like if I go to a doctor, if I'm Indian or African, they're not going to say like, oh, I haven't studied African bodies, or I haven't, you know, the doctor is going to treat you because we are the same people. And I think if we feel not unable to work in some other context, that means it is our education and upbringing that is narrow. Otherwise, I don't see anything in my Indian education that makes me unprepared to build in a different. See, the force of gravity doesn't change, you know, the engineering and any first principles. I know my climatic principles. I wasn't taught in school only to deal with my climate. In fact, I'm astonished some schools don't teach any climate even. So, you know, so the question is, you know, the old school way of teaching things gave us enough tools, I think. And if we don't live in box ourselves into bubbles, then you really know how to operate. And I think I really believe that we are more common than we're different. I have not studied abroad. I did my PhD many years after having had my practice. So I don't have, I'm just at ease with practicing anywhere. But also, I don't, when you talk about international, or what was that thing about how am I going to expand and colonize the world with my big office? You know, I don't have that aim. I also don't, for me, human scale is very important in my buildings, but also in my process. I don't want to have more people in my studio than I can remember their names, you know? And if, like, there are people who have that kind of offices, I've never looked for that. And I don't want to colonize anything, you know? I think I believe in I just want to I just feel that I seek knowledge and I want to do good work. And the very fact that I don't have that practice, look, I'm already internationally present. Denmark has, you know, approached me to show my, you know, so obviously the work I'm doing is seeming to be relevant, but that I'm a very grounded, you know, it's not like I'm going to change now my ambitions and goals in my life. You know, I'm seeking the same thing that I did. When people appreciate it, it feels rewarding. But that doesn't mean I have to now have different ambitions. You know, I'm the same person. When I feel it's relevant, I think, okay, I can share that experience that I had, but it doesn't change anything for me. I hope there'll be many, many more small practitioners who have who feel happy about what they are creating, you know, and I think that will be, and to be exchanging, that is my version of a good future.
Mm. So, there's a question here again about material. They thank you for an inspiring lecture, and they're asking, what are your thoughts on reviving time-tested materials like lime and plaster? So there's a few, and there's a question about color pigments to cement. The material exploration seems to continue in your practice. Has the method of testing materials changed in any ways now that you're experimenting in different locations and part of different universities?
Not really. Sorry to give a banal answer, but no, you know, no, because you always explore according to the areas that you need to clarify, and you just take, you know, there's always constant expansion because you have certain experience and you confront a certain situation, you try to recreate something, you know, but you think you get some, ideas of technology transfer because of some new stimulus. And I think, but like I said, I think the tests and the basic structures and theories are all the classic thing. But yes, with more knowledge and experience, I feel we can optimize. I feel we can build more intelligently. For me, means to build more things, to save, not only to save natural resources, but also uh, not only to reduce, but also to increase beauty and satisfaction, and to create architecture that really contributes to the human well-being, health, and happiness. And I think that many things that the only parts I kind of struggle with is, some of the habits in the developed countries where you can't even open a window, for instance. And I'm so glad, that's one thing I like about COVID, that people are forced to open the windows. And now we are going to have to question some of the theories that are not letting us open those windows, in the name of efficiency or energy efficiency, because I believe nothing is porous, even as nothing, everything is porous, nothing is sealed. Actually, even our skins and everything has to have exchange with the environment, with our habitat. And I'm hoping that that's the area that I don't like to accept. So, I like to accept the universal laws as you keep discovering them, like gravity and things like that. I don't like to challenge. I know people who do architecture proposals where they challenge things like gravity, but they don't challenge the man-made construct laws. They don't challenge certain useless bylaws. They don't challenge certain habits, or man-made. Yeah, I would like regulations that force us to do certain things that are not good for us. I would rather challenge those and rather humbly submit to things like gravity and other laws, which are not, there's no need to defy those because they are good for us,
So we have a question that's asking, you have a very well highlighted the importance of conscious material consumption. Do you think that any of the urban projects, especially those in Oroville, where material usage is conscious and innovative, has unwittingly produced gentrification?
No, I don't think so. We want to produce gentrification because it was a city that we have created. I mean, the whole thing was envisioned as an opportunity, as a lab to test all aspects, to radically rethink all aspects of city, from education, economy, etc., to have a critical mass that you can really try all this out integrally. So that was the intention. But I don't think that I don't think there has been any such big impact of my work or anything, to be very honest with you. I think it's just my practice, and there are many people doing work in this kind of direction, even though we may not yet be the mainstream. But I think there are too many other forces behind gentrification and so on. Even right now, because of the commodification we spoke about, it's always a land price that is much more than whatever kind of building we do. So the people just sell properties by a square meter price, regardless of whether I used healthy materials or a better design or whatever. So I don't yet feel that it has any real impact on the gentrification. No.
Another question is, most projects you show were in India, but how easy is it to source local materials in Europe compared to India?
By the way, I'm really worried when you say how easy it is, because don't please think that my projects were easy, okay? It's not that I did that because it was easy. It was really super difficult. Everything like cooking a house or making something, all of them were kind of very difficult. They were not really difficult because, one is excited to do things when one has an idea and you think, oh, it'll be worth the strain. It's not like there was no strain. And it's like in Europe as well. I don't think things are going to be easier or more difficult. I think I just don't think about that. If I feel like something is better, I want to do it anyway. If I have obstacles, I always try to think about what the obstacles are and then I want to do it anyway, you know, just so that I, like, as even as a woman, you know, when you grow up and, you know, have to, you know, if we were to get in easily discouraged when you see a difficulty, then we should have no life at all. And that's not the case, you know. So what is the use of thinking about difficulties? It's not, it will be difficult here because the habits are even more set deeply into some trends, you know. But that's okay. It's okay because I think anyway, architecture is anyway difficult. If you do a bad thing or a good thing, it's a very difficult thing. So one shouldn't worry about difficulties, I think.
And sorry about the wording. I think what they meant more was the comparison in the two locations.
Yeah, but it's true. Some of the comparisons would be, I think, habits. See, sometimes when you're creating something in a place where nothing is there, you're forced to be ingenious, you know. You're forced to be ingenious and you have to do something. You have no funds, you have no materials, you cannot survive if you didn't try to be clever, you know. But in some other cases, when you have a lot, and you have a lot, even more than, if you have more food than you can eat, you're sometimes not even hungry, you know, because it's like too much what you have. So there is a very different kind of work that one it would involve, but that's only on the attitude aspect of others, you know, who may you know, it's very interesting that they call you just alternative if they feel that you're going to come up with something, so you get put in a label called alternative, you know, person or architect or whatever, because you're, you know. So yes, that is a stereotyping that is likely to happen, but I think the actual material difficulty will all come down to engineering in the end, and that is not really difficult. Here in Europe, you have more labs, more know-how, more tools, more everything.
Yeah, I think that relates to that the comment you made earlier about there is nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all. I think that's just the most amazing comment to make. And there's a question here about corporate developers. So how do you convince them to not do that? How do you convince them to adopt that way of thinking?
I don't want to convince anyone. I just don't want to, it's not going to affect my life, you know. I mean, as a teacher, as a theorist, as a whatever, I'm totally take note of what they're doing. But why should I now leave my own creativity and go and try to convince them about and educate them and tell them how they should be living their life? If they feel like their life is rewarding, you know, they will find out later on, or whatever it is. I don't really, I don't feel like we need to convince anyone. If you do what you do, you know, people will seek you out, and when their ears are open, then you should talk. What's the point, you know, going crazy? I'll go crazy if I even take on such a task. But if they ask for an advice, and sometimes they call you, you know, these developer forum or whatever, to give you a keynote, so then you tell your thing, and then if they say, oh, how could we do this, then you tell them a little more, you know. But I think otherwise we can only talk among ourselves who are like-minded and think, okay, what should we do with those guys, or what should we affect policy change somewhere? I would say maybe we should give our inputs to make policy changes. We can't go to individual developers and try to influence them, because what will you do? They will, if you tell them, I'll give you more money if you do this, then they will listen, but you can't give them more money, because money is not going to be the driving force. So in the end, greed, and I don't want to accuse all of you developers who are listening to this conversation. I'm not saying that you're all greedy, but there is a culture that has institutionalized a certain kind of wanting more money kind of thing, you know. And that's the thing that is behind that, and there we can't change, because these are values, you know. What do you can't tell somebody, don't steal, don't this, don't that. You can only tell your children. So that's what I can only do. And you can tell your students, I would say.
Since we've kind of touched on the students, someone wanted to know, it's very easy to get wrapped up in like advanced technology and this idea of constantly progressing your work. So do you have any advice for students who are in school, how they can get connected with the making process at a deeper level and like start implementing that in their designs?
I think just take a pencil and take a paper and start drawing first of all. And fix your button when your shirt drops a button, or just do little things. If you need a specific shelf around you and you don't find it in a shop, make it. And I would go that way. I mean, not to do it just as a job. I think what is the most important thing is to be present. No matter what technology, whether it's a digital technology, whatever it is you're using, if you are more present, if you can inhabit your space and inhabit your time also, and be more present, because each moment is fleeting, you know. If you're more present, you will automatically be in your body, and you will embody, like your mind and your body will be together. So you will automatically be engaging yourself, you know. You will not feel that, okay, I have to get my exercise from a separate activity, and I have to, you know, you would in your life, if you are in your body, if you embody, how to say, if you, yeah, you just inhabit your space, your body and your time, you will use your whole body, not only one finger. You'll use the full hand, you know. Naturally, I would say that's the only way I can imagine. Otherwise, it'll be just one more course and one more mental thing, you know, and one more feeling guilty that I'm not using enough my hands, you know.
How are we doing time-wise, George?
George, you're muted.
Yeah, but time for a few more questions that we're coming up to the end of the time. Maybe 2 more questions if we can.
I'm here, so you tell me.
I just looked and saw what time it is in Berlin, Anupama, and
It's okay, but imagine if I had flown down, I would have to wake up and take an early morning flight and whatever. So it's fine. If you want to chat, I'm here.
Yeah, there's a question about technology and using technology and the current use of robotics and fabrication. And there's an assumption that it's replacing the craftsman and the hand dexterity. And how can architecture help give the craftsperson a broader platform to sustain their skills, given the current technologies that I think are starting to replace the craftsperson?
I think that if people appreciate, like if you buy a hand knitted, if you prefer a hand knitted scarf and a homemade cake more, then those things will go on. And if you prefer, and when you stop detecting even the difference between a industrial cake and a grandmother cake, or, you know, if you just don't notice anymore, because you're just not even present in you don't taste, you know, you're not there, you're not feeling it. So in that case, we will go that way. And I think I think that if you are very present, you can use all these digital technologies for very good things. And nobody has asked us to, you know, like the iPhone is there, but it's up to me how many hours I use it. Just because someone made it doesn't mean now I have to whole day stare at the screen, right? It's up to me to go for a walk still, and to still phone or meet my real friends. So it's again, the technologies are there. That doesn't mean we have to be enslaved, you know. So if we and nothing tells us that the artisan must not coexist with the technology. They also have their iPhones, and we all can have everything, and we can all advance, you know. It is again, I think we are victims of having grown up in this kind of in post-industrial times, where you think that whatever is being done is for all. You know, actually we are all alive beings, and we are free people. We can decide every minute. We can be surrounded by technologies. We have to it's, if you want, you asked how could artisans be involved. You know, if you are an architect and you want to use an artisan, you will choose that technology or incorporate that. You know, you shouldn't be doing it because you feel pity for the artisan, because it's not even good for the artisan to feel patronized by you. So I think it's a question of society's values, and then everybody, you know, like every election, we have to see everyone wants different things, and we see where the masses pull it, you know.
I think in our chat screen, Marwa has a question, and I think if Marwa is still here, maybe we can get her to ask you directly. I think that would be.
Yeah, of course. I wanted to stay in the background and enjoy all the words that Kunda has been spilling the facts for us this whole night. And this is a little more reflective of your time in the present. So outside of architecture, what are you currently interested in, and how is it influencing your design, your philosophical thoughts, or just keeping you at the present? Yeah.
I have three growing interests. One is poetry. I'm reading and rereading and reading The Poetics of Space by Gaston Bachelard. I'm also, because interested in psychoanalysis as well as poetry and all of that. So that's one thing I'm reading. I'm growing more and more. I'm more and more attracted to poetry. Maybe it's my age, I don't know. The second thing is I've taken a lot of interest in biology lately, because I realized almost, and in fact, there is a section in my exhibition in Louisiana. I hope you all can get to see it, or at least on some digital platforms. I have created a Wunderkammer where I have called it the architecture of time. I'm trying to show and share that I think architecture existed before humans and even before life itself occurred. I think I have made a piece where I've described that time is the architect, you know, because the passage of time has left its imprint on materials. And, you know, when you look at certain stone formations, or you look at bubbles, or you look at, you know, time passes and things get shaped, and the architecture of time is seen. And if you look at it in an evolutionary perspective, and that's where I'm interested in biology, is that after this matter, at some point life emerged, and then the architecture of life, I mean, in the DNA, it's already the geometry and the order of a lot of things are inbuilt, and they're going to only unfold over time. And then you get to see why mushrooms curl, and then you see why, you know, the leaves, they have their patterns which look like city plans, because the same arteries and veins are there, like in our body and in our cities also. So, you know, architecture through life. And then the third section is architecture of the mind, where humans, our mind has evolved. Our biology includes the mind, and the mind has created a set of things, tools with which we build, and the tool shapes us back. So you know, there's all that homo faber thing, and the, you know, basically the fact that we are making things, and that's how our architecture is getting made, from the starting with a brick mold or whatever it is. So I've put all those objects there, and I really love your question. So I'm into biology, and the last other thing is anthropology. So I'm nowadays getting into these topics, and yeah, it gives me refuge to, when I don't have answers, I try to listen to people. When first I go to the anthropologist to wonder why humans are doing this and that, and then I go to the biology and say, no, our biology, is a bigger prevalent thing, and evolution will happen in spite of us. And when I don't understand anyone, I go to the poets. They know everything. So thank you very much for your question. I just rarely shared this kind of answer. So I really love the question. Thank you.
No, thank you. It's always nice to hear you speak. So I'm very honored to hear you answer my questions.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's.
Well, then I think, thank you so much. Anupama, what a wonderful evening you've given us, and thank you for sharing that. I'd like to ask Sadberg to say a few words of conclusion before we draw the evening to a close.
Yeah, I would like to thank you on behalf of the student body, the faculty and staff and community at the Department of Architectural Science. Your words this evening has left us with a lot to sort of reanalyze and reestablish our approach to time and materiality. And I was going to say a statement that really kind of resonated with me that you invited us to take in, and Carlo kind of mentioned it earlier, was that there's nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all. And I think that really resonated with me, and I think it might have with a lot of other students as well. And it really left me kind of to ponder upon that. And furthermore, to us students here in this department, representation really matters. So we're grateful that we had the opportunity to welcome you and introduce your accomplishments and journey as a female architect of color to our community. So thank you again for taking the time to be here with us tonight, or I guess early morning, late night for you.
Oh, that's perfectly my pleasure. And I thank each of you for being so engaged. I loved the questions. And I just want to say, because you mentioned women and color and all of that, I just want to say that on a parting note is that if people, see you in a certain way, as long as you don't see yourself in that way, it will not be a problem, in the sense that whatever it is we have to face, it's the obstacle shouldn't become inside us, and that's the part we can work on that part. And then, and then in fact, sometimes when you're unconsciously treated in a certain way, you make it that thought your own. So just please feel empowered, because inside you can have full control of not blocking yourself. Don't work against yourself. So then there is no problem in facing the other one, or no problem. There is much less problem, because at least you have your integrity. And so I would like to leave that message, because that's the way Marva also introduced me. And, I want to really thank you for this evening. It has been a very, it has had a sense of intimacy in the conversation. And I'm so sorry, students, if I have, with all my philosophical answers to your concrete questions, if I may have confused you. But it's okay, to not feel in the comfort zone and feel very secure about everything. It's really fine. Don't be worried about. Step out of the comfort zone from time to time. It's good. Keep you fit.
Well, thank you, Anupama. I just want to make a personal comment, and this is to you, Anupama, but also to everybody. Last fall, when your name was suggested, I said, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? Because I saw your email address. So I picked up the telephone. I picked up the telephone and I dialed the number, and you answered the phone. And that was the beginning of our conversation. And I'm reminded of, in these difficult times, or in these challenging times, we're all virtually connecting with each other through whatever, an email. And I was so grateful that you picked up the phone, and we were able to continue this conversation in a manner that, as best as possible, was able to have an intimate dialogue and a personal dialogue with you amongst all of us. So I'm just so grateful for that. And I'm so grateful that you picked up the telephone too.
Oh, but why should I not? These are the things that I tell you. A lot of people think that when you become successful, or you become, they think that I may have a secretary, but doesn't mean I have to not be there. What's the use of everything if I am not there?
Well, no,
I am. I equally, you were present, and we had talked a few times, and that's the whole point of, the human encounter. I think that's the only thing we'll remember.
It goes without saying, and I appreciate that so much. So I just wanted to make that small observation on a personal note to conclude. So this brings this evening to an end. And if you have comments, I'm sure that if you want to give a call to Anupama, she'll pick up the phone and,
yes,
and be happy to talk with you.
Yes.
And we'll continue the conversation. I hope someday we'll be able to host you here in person at Ryerson. It would be a great pleasure. I know that we would all look forward to that. So to say thank you and good night, and to invite everybody in February for our next lecture, which will be hosted by Ryerson, and we're inviting Jean-Pierre Choupin of the Université de Montréal to talk about competitions and the idea of excellence and his work in that area. So thank you so much to everybody, and good night, gute Nacht in Berlin, and we'll see you all the next time. So thank you so much.
Yes, everyone, please feel free to stay in touch and don't feel you're disturbing me. Just keep in touch, okay?
Good.
Take care.